live. Video is starting. Excellent. Um, Wonderful. Okay, we're live on Facebook. Great. Hello, everyone, and we're back. This is our last conversation of 2023, and we're going to go out with a bang with a topic that is very important to me. I think in some ways this is probably why I'm a Swedenborgian minister. Swedenborg's handling of the ordeals of the spiritual life. And our chapter this week is titled Crises of the Spirit. So we're going to get into it, and we're going to get into what he has to share with us about how we grow. We did repentance, we did regeneration last week. Now, how does this actually happen? How do we actually grow on the spiritual path? And this week's chapter kind of gets into that nitty gritty a little bit more. And I'm joined this morning by Connie McCosker from out in San Pedro at the Garden Church. I want to say hi.
Hi, excited to be here. I was on the very first one, I think, in September.
I think you were. I think you helped us kick off way back then. Yes. So
Glad to
glad to
be
have you back. And we have Reverend Andy Stinson with us as well.
Hello, hello.
Great. Looks like we have some people joining us online. Hey, Ralph and Renee. Great. And I got some preemptive questions about this chapter that we could potentially jump into as well. But where do you guys want to begin? Is there a particular part of this chapter or this story about crises of the spirit that either of you would like to start with this morning? This afternoon, I guess it is.
I mean, it's a big bite,
Mhm.
it is, there's, in fine Swedenborg fashion, there's kind of a couple of, there's the one liner right here that you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, how does that work? And so there's, but I think, I mean, I thought maybe a place to start would just be at his first sentence, because, everything else really is kind of an explanation of what, and just the crisis of the spirit, help goodness in us gain control over evil, and truth gain control over falsity. And like that, I mean, to me, like in my own spiritual life, there's no greater just encouragement than that, because it's like my suffering is not for nothing, that and my trying is not for nothing, it's not that I haven't been abandoned by God, I haven't been left to the side of the road, it's not that I haven't been pure in thought, word, and deed, it's not that I haven't, I'm not good enough, all of those mantras that just kind of grind holes in our soul, that come straight out of hell seemingly, that this has a purpose. And I think that I so appreciate his starting with that, of saying like, look, this is a function, and its function is critical to us being able to receive, all good gifts that are there for us, to be able to, to deepen and widen and our walk and our connection with God. But that, to me, I mean, like that, after that, I'm like, okay, there's a reason. Like, it's not, it's not just all, fangs and claws all the time for nothing,
Yeah. Thank you, Andy. I like that. I certainly share that, I think, I don't know, we have to do a survey sometime, but it feels like a lot of us we don't come into ministry because life is golden roses and we want to like throw the roses at everyone else. We often step into the spiritual work and the path because it's so hard. And that's something that's, Swedenborg brings out. It's true in the Christian story. Jesus's story obviously is not a bed of roses. And it's true in the Buddhist tradition, bringing up suffering as part of the story of life that we cannot avoid. And yet when we kind of almost embrace it or allow it or recognize that there's something possibly beyond it, that's what actually can transform it and transform us along the way. Yeah. What about you, Connie? What stuck out to you in this chapter?
Well, the opening line also struck me,
Mhm.
but in a different way, because I want to say, oh no, am I not regenerating because I don't think I've had crisis of the spirit. I
Mhm.
have not experienced mental anguish,
Mhm.
anxiety. Oh no.
Oh no.
Do I need to?
Let's not make that into a problem, but
Right. Yeah.
I I hear that.
Um,
And
you
that
know,
may be true for other people.
I've had spiritual awarenesses, I want to say,
Mhm.
um, basically that led me to this faith tradition, but I haven't had mental anguish about giving up previous Catholic thinking.
Interesting.
It was easy to let it go. So,
Uh-huh.
I mean, yeah, that was
Yeah.
my initial like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, and I think like everything, everything's a matter of degrees, and we may feel things. Some of us may be programmed to feel things more dramatically and painfully, and perhaps for you it happened in a subtle way or a slower way. I mean, yeah, I mean, but he does, the the process of growth and change, people experience it differently, based on their path and their process. But I guess just if it does start happening, Connie, you don't have to worry that you can be excited. Let us know. Send us a note if you start to fall into inner crises and change. One of the questions I got ahead of time was about this the need to hold the part of how the battles are waged are through the truths of our religious faith and kind of what that means. What does it mean to hold on to a truth of our religious faith? And this has come up at other times because
Right.
he uses this phrase in some of the other chapters. Um, does this just mean the word, the Bible? Is that what kind of brings us through? I don't know, do either of you want to comment on what that kind of what is it we hold on to in the midst of spiritual crises? What is it that leads us through a time of trial or crises? What's that been for maybe that's a personal thing with
I mean,
if
yeah.
you share.
I think too, there's just some helpful language stuff there too, is, I don't know a lot about the process, but I know a little bit about when, kind of George was working through this translation, there is that this notion of religious faiths, is really, it's not what we think, I think, when we think about, this is not a doctrinal statement, or this is not a, how much of the Anastasian Creed do we think is really true, or do we, accept into our hearts? This is really more about, I think, the way I've come to think about it is like an encounter with the Logos, an encounter with the religious faiths are really this idea of what's really real. What do you really call real in your life? What do you really, is the, is my status at work or my status in family or the car that I drive really who my identity is based off of? Am I really in that, or is there something, is there a deeper sense of what do I kind of define Logos as kind of what I call the really real, the things that when you strip everything else away, still endures, that mattered 2,000 years ago, that mattered today. And that when we encounter these truths and these religious truths, we're encountering the things that drive us towards that.
Mm.
And so, and I think it's a really hard, like, I know, I know George, I think, struggled with this in terms of what the right word was. And I think a lot of other translators from Swedenborg have had the same struggle to really say, what is he getting at when he talks about religious truths? And I think he's talking about, these kind of things are what is it that we really like, as you said, Sage, like when things get hard, what do we lean on? Like, well, I at least got a BMW in the law, I mean, what do we really, and that's like, we can giggle at that, but honestly, like we are all we're a lot, like we're all a lot more susceptible to that than we want to in our own, you know, in our own BMW lane. Like it might not be that, but it might be something in our, you know, our material being or something, you know, like we're all a lot, you know, so, and when we encounter, you know, this what is that beautiful, there's this beautiful line in here where he says this, yeah, so, the middle of 199, you know, where the earthly self accepts truths that align with the desire for truth that has developed in our inner self. You know, that this is a reconciliation. This is a reconciliation of our external and our internal loves, you know, like are these things, you know, and that these things are inherently, I think, in us disjointed. Like they can't be otherwise, really, in terms of how we're wired. So, you know, to me, when we talk about religious truths, you know, I think, you know, 500 years of Protestantism has brought us this idea to think everything is from the earlobes up, you know, like, wow, this is a concept. It's like, no. Swedenborg was, you know, he didn't have the, he's a pre-enlightenment guy, really. Like he's not burdened with that the way we are. And so when we read him, we really have to, I think, hear that he's saying, like, what are these really real things in our life that we're encountering that are actually becoming problematic, or becoming, you know, giving us feedback that is, or that we're really invested in, that are not going to take us to good places if we invest all of ourselves in them. We're not going to be reliable when things break down. And so, so that's kind of, and every translator, I think, has struggled with that, to kind of try and get that right.
Yeah. I like the way you put that. One of the things that I've been thinking about in regard to this, in regard to holding religious faith, and not just immediately jumping to, that means have your Bible with you and then it'll all be there. But something kind of deeper than that is just thinking about how we are communal animals. Like we grow up in families, in society, we are not isolated. We do not, and we are taught by our community. We are nurtured into life by others, and we need that. We can't just be born in the woods and come to spiritual enlightenment and regeneration. We need community, and that, thinking back to every generation has had its religious faith, like its understanding of the good, its understanding of the kind of why we get up in the morning and what the purpose of life is. And each generation has had different sacred texts, different rituals, you know, all kinds of different ways of articulating that. But there's been something that's been keeping us going. And that we need that. We need to be nurtured into that. And that is, and whatever that is what kind of we hold on to, and what can certainly develop and grow as well, you know, as we have new experiences. But
there's a great
higher life, that higher,
to that great, and to that point, like there's a great you know, thing I was listening to, that they were really talking about, you know, we all kind of fantasize, well, you know, we were just born in the wrong age, and if I was just born in the Middle Ages, like it would have been better, or what, you know, whatever kind of fantasy we tell ourselves about that. But the reality is if we were born in a different age, we would not be who we are.
be different.
We would be inherently different people, like right down to our cellular biology, right down to which genes choose to express themselves and which genes don't. Like, we would literally be other people than we are. And so, you know, I mean, which is gorgeous when you think of kind of Swedenborg's vision of the grand man, and, you know, each of us in our own time and our own space, and like you know, the uniqueness of each one of us and how that plugs in. And there's really a gorgeousness to that. But it's also this, like, that encounter with our religious faith, the logos, is actually entirely ours, entirely bound in ours and our community, bound in, you know, the community that we have supporting us, what we're grown out of, what all of the, you know, the depending on the translation, you know, our inherited evils, or whatever you want to call that, or, you know, just the stuff we learn along the way, the remains that are placed in it, like all of that is absolutely bound in time and space, and
Mhm.
absolutely bound in our as a part of our efforting.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And that all of that's kind of wrapped up in that little phrase, like our religious truths, like that
Yeah.
he's trying to grasp at, I think.
Yeah. And that they're different in each,
Yeah, yeah.
or they're expressed differently. Maybe
Right.
there
No,
is some
they're
kind
actually
of
right. They're
essential.
actually the same. If you run them back, they're all kind of, from one or two sources, but you're right. Like but they're, like if you take him at his word that there is an infinite number of ways to come into relationship with the divine, there's an infinite number of ways to go to heaven, then there is in fact an infinite number of ways for us to express our evils too, like for us to, and to encounter our religious truths and that sort of stuff. So yeah, it really is our fingerprint of our spiritual fingerprint in a way. Yeah.
So coming to this idea of Condi bringing up, maybe I haven't been through a spiritual crisis. I don't relate to this. Andy and I sort of joking that, yes, we've had plenty. But Andy, are you willing to share an example? We did sort of get the question, what does this actually look like? What does a spiritual crisis, what would be an example of a spiritual crisis? I mean, maybe we don't have enough time to really describe that process or that experience. I mean, read this chapter if you want some details on what that feels like. There's some very, especially 196, kind of the details of what it looks like to have all of your evils stirred up, to sort of have everything you've ever done wrong is like right in your face. Every single misstep, every harm you've ever offered, for me, that I really resonate with that feeling, with that experience of in those moments. And he describes it, how in those moments, we don't even feel that connection to God anymore, that somehow that's like closed off. And we just are the worst. And we just are, all we can see is our failings and feeling, and that feeling of disconnection. And I really relate to, and the only thing we can kind of do is sort of hold on to that little thread of religious faith, that little thread of like, okay, I'm here. Like there must be some goodness in that. Like I'm here and I'm going to stay here. And sometimes I feel like that's the best we can do, is to hold on. And but anyway, do you want to describe it at all, Andy? Or
I mean, I think, there's lots of different ways to come at it, but I think, I think there, and I think there's all kinds of different varieties, but just like a garden variety thing, I think, which is an experience maybe we've all had to one degree or another. It's like, you just kind of imagine yourself, you're having a great day, and this has happened. This will happen to me every so often. Like I'll have a great day. Things are going well. Maybe I'm probably in the car, I'm driving somewhere, and I'll start to think about and then all of a sudden out of left field, something will come in that will be like, you remember that time you were really cruel? You remember that time you were really mean to that person, and that you just and that you can't even make up for that anymore because you don't even know where they are. Like you can't even and that's who you really are. Like that's you're actually like this really like that will you'll be driving down the road and having a fine day, and then all of a sudden there'll be this kind of crash into your consciousness of some kind of afflictive message, and it's different for everybody or whatever, but however you experience that, but that's kind of, that is, you didn't originate that thought. You didn't even welcome in that thought, but it's one of these things that actually, and if we let that go, that can actually catapult us into kind of this sense of like, well, maybe I am kind of a horrible person, or maybe I am like, maybe I really don't deserve the goodness of my day, and that, because it often, I think, is like I think for a lot of people, it is when we kind of encounter our goodness, when we're counting, because that, if you look at the process that he lays out in this chapter, there's the truth, it is our truths that then give kind of, room for our goodness to, that support our goodness. And then, so we're kind of already down the garden path, and then that gives way to our uses, which will go do good things once we kind of have married those up, but once we kind of get in that place where we're like, life isn't so bad. Like, this is good. Like, there's goodness here. And there's, and I'm in that goodness, and I'm in that flow. There's this way in which that we, are the truth of that gets attacked. Are you really good? Be a really good guy? Or is that really all right? And and then we have to come back and we have to be like, oh, well, yeah. I mean, I've missed the mark on any number of places, but that doesn't mean I don't deserve love. That doesn't mean I don't deserve, I'm not worthy of a good day. Doesn't mean I'm not, and even if I'm not, it's where I am and what we are. And so you have to kind of circle back to that. And I think, that seems maybe very garden variety, but I think it's kind of to me, in my experience, that's an experience most people can kind of relate to. It's like when you're in that good place and then all of a sudden you get kind of sucker punched. There's this way in which that can really, that feeling state, if you think about that can catapult us into that can really be that beginning of a spiritual crisis. And it can also have a lot more subtler forms too and stuff like that. But that's just one that popped to mind.
I think that's a great example. Yeah, it can pop in a moment. It also can build up for months and months and months. It can be a long depression. It can be all kinds of manifestations. It can come when we're feeling good. But the idea that and this is grounding us in kind of the Swedenborgian cosmology, that we kind of exist kind of between heaven and hell, kind of between God and evil, or the kind of the human creations of evil. Barb is kind of equating this or wondering about where ego fits into this. I think I've been really thinking about this a lot, like, okay, evil spirits, what's that about? We don't live in the Middle Ages, we're not I don't want it to become this sort of simplistic thing or this like ghost story. But to me, evil spirits and the idea that we are sensitive to influences beyond is not hard to handle, because we all think and we all notice thoughts that come into our minds that are what we might characterize as hellish or evil. And I think of those thoughts, I just think of like, especially I've been thinking a lot about like when humans first started like really thinking or like writing or like having ideas. Like, it is sort of a limited history. Like, we've been on this planet a long time, but like not forever. And so hell has like built as like each generation has told new stories and has created new harms. And so like all those, so you can almost think of it in a biological way. It doesn't have to just be spiritual. It's like we have all these generations of stories in our DNA, like in our, in the ethos, in the collective unconscious, whatever you want to say. And they come in, and we are sensitive to them, and that God uses kind of all of that stuff, to help us sift through and grow to a new level, to say no to new wrongs. And that's the one, as much as it's scary to be alive right now, I am happy that we've named more things that we don't like. We've seen more evils, and we've been able to say no to them. And so these spiritual crises happen in this tension between the deep love, the deep essence of life that we are, the love that causes us to exist, that's actually real, that's actually allowing us to breathe and to be here, that sees ourselves as that understands we're totally interconnected and one being, and it's just all really good. And then all the other crap, like the way we exist between those two things. And these crises help us to over and over again release more and more of the evil stuff that we maybe have made ours and don't want to have as ours anymore.
Yeah. And the process of our growing faith that happens in that, that the you can call it maturity, you can call it maturation, however you want to kind of understand it. But that notion that, that even crises of faith after a little bit can actually become really hopeful things, because they can really be like, oh God, I know, I know, first, I mean, I don't know how old I was when I finally realized that no storm blows forever. You know what I mean? But in fact, storms, just like in the natural world, storms end. Well, spiritual crises end too, and bad days end, and there's a way in which, and that doesn't mean that we're not going to pick it up tomorrow and contend with things, but it does mean that there's these ways in which there's this you know, I think particularly in this process that he lays out, there's really this hopefulness underneath this stuff that can come as we mature. And you know, and Connie, I think I heard a little bit about that when you were talking about, you know, in terms of, you know, like you know, you're not kind of leaping to kind of be able to name this. And I'm like, well, I think, you know, and part of that, you know, we don't necessarily always start there, you know, but we do, but that is the place that we're being taken, is that, you know, these things aren't, they're, you know, they are in fact kind of more the motion of the ocean than they are necessarily the us being swallowed up every time. Though, you know, early on and often and sometimes they will in fact feel like being swallowed up. But you know, we have a great story about being swallowed up. We get spit out and we go off and do good things, you know, like, so you know.
Yeah.
Can I jump in with?
Yes, please do. Please do.
I appreciate the example.
Mhm.
That was good because I feel like in all of Swedenborg, I need more examples. I just this truth, but which truth? What truth? But for me, evil spirits is maybe when I'm in a situation and I'm with a group of people and I have a negative thoughts or judgmental thoughts about them and their behavior and what they're doing. And so maybe that's evil spirits for me. I try not to react with negative words. I try not to show those things, but the fact that I'm having those thoughts are maybe the evil spirits. I also wanted to jump back when you were talking about if we had lived in another time. Even Swedenborg says in this chapter, faith is rare these days. We always think that whatever time we're living in, you know, faith, no one believes anymore. No one, I mean, I think that's going to be something that people always think throughout time. And also, we do not sense what is happening to our inner selves. And we are incapable of judging our own state. That was something from the chapter that I thought was really profound.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's always, I always try to use remind both myself and anybody I'm talking to about these things, is just like, look, the first thing you need to know is you have incredibly, you know, an incredible dashboard, an array of sensors and gauges and all these things, and they're all wrong. Like, your gauges are wrong for you. Like, you're, you know, like what you think is a 2 is actually a 10, or what you think is a 10 is actually like, your gauges are broken. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you a person. It just, you know, and you know, that's a beautiful line, Connie, that, you know, we can't, you know, like, we never know. We never, you know, we don't know, you know, like,
And that's why we
don't know what we're going through.
And that's why we need each other. I mean, I think if there was any reason for the church, it's that. It's so we can sit with each other in these times of crises and remind each other, no, you're not totally evil and lost, and you know, you are going to be okay and you're going to get through this. You know, I feel like that's such a big, that's what we can offer each other, you know, and we don't have to all be going, and it's a blessing because we're not always going through the same thing at the same time. And we can give each other our strength when others are weak, and vice versa. And again, that's why I was drawn to this church. There's a great story of William James' father, Henry Sr., kind of going through a really hard time and meeting a Swedenborgian, and she says, "You're being vastated. That's what's going on here." And all of a sudden he's like, "Oh," you know, I'm sure it didn't solve the problem immediately, but it felt really good to have his struggle affirmed as a spiritual process, that he didn't have to fear in the same way that I think we often fear suffering, that it will never end, that it has no purpose, that it's a sign of our failure as human beings. And to have language for these trials as just a part of the, you know, it's so much a part of, I mean, it's like you look out the window and you wonder, like, how could we ever think it's not a part of life? I mean, there was a huge storm yesterday. A tree fell down outside my house. Like, that's how things work. You know, the natural world is constantly stirred up, and if it weren't, it'd be dead. If it wasn't
Right.
stirred up, we would not be growing. We would not be healthy. We would not, it's really necessary and needs to be more normalized, I think, in our world. We sort of like, and I think it needs to be normalized in our churches. And I think maybe it is more so, but like, is church where you always just put on your greatest suit and look good and sit nicely and then go home, or is church a place where you can,
Right.
yeah. And I think that's why
Yeah.
the Garden Church, one of the reasons it's such a beautiful mission is it's more real. And, we need spaces where we can be real with each other.
Yeah. Well, I try to wear a suit to church every Sunday, and some days it's an actual representation of how I am, and some days it's aspirational.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
some days it's how I hope I will one day be.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm facing this, I get to wear a stole, not a collar.
Yeah.
At my church, that stole gets so dirty every week that I'm like, I didn't know there would be heavy, dry cleaning bills associated
Oh
with
no.
stoles.
We'll need
But
to
I
get you
love
a
it.
special.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the
I want to
stain.
make you a stole with pockets in it, I think. So it could be like you could put your gardening tools at the bottom. That might be helpful.
It's too long and I trip over it.
Yeah.
But it's symbolic of the messiness of our
Yeah.
church.
And it's okay to have aspirational beauty, I mean, I think there's none of this. We want to be put together sometimes too, and there's no right or wrong way to kind of step through all of this. And I do think we do each other a real disservice. And it's one of the things that I think needs I think our generation, speaking of time or like what's happening in the world right now, this is a moment where we are starting to really look at what's going on in here and how is it affecting other people. We're the era of therapy and psychology, and we're the era of understanding trauma and its effects. There's a lot of human wisdom that's growing around these states, and probably people are describing these states in spiritual circles, in psychological circles, and lots of different modalities, and we're describing the same thing, and learning how to navigate these experiences and support each other in them. And there's more work to do, because I think it's a very real part of our journey. And as he points out in here, it's not something that ends. It's something that continues. He's a little bit, there's one paragraph in here, and actually, this was another question, was the word victory. It's in number 199, through spiritual crises in which we are victorious, evil spirits are deprived of their power to do anything further against us. So sometimes he does talk about victory, and that when we get through a crisis, we have this experience of victory and we're sort of protected a little bit. And in another paragraph, he says, these crises will continue. If we don't experience them here in this life, we'll experience them in the next life, that they're kind of unavoidable. I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Are there like maybe it makes me think of that there are certain evil spirits that are like put down. like there's certain things we struggle enough where it's no longer on our radar. That's not something I'm going to struggle about anymore. It doesn't mean I won't struggle about other things, but there may be certain times when we do have a certain amount of kind of victory over I don't know, something.
And I think his language matters here, where he says, through spiritual crises in which we are victorious, evil spirits are deprived of their power.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we don't see them, and it doesn't mean they're not around. It just means they don't have power over us anymore. And I think that's there's this way in which they're, I mean, it's always the good news of being, of being in spiritual crisis is that you have something that you were enslaved to prior to this, a bad idea or a bad a bad impulse, a bad thought, something that wasn't serving you, that you were enslaved to, that you were unaware of, that has now been brought into awareness. And it's brought into awareness so that the Lord can in fact remove it from us and be
Mhm.
victorious over it, and basically kind of lock it up. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it's at the periphery of our being. It's at the,
Mhm.
it's that, it doesn't have a hold over us anymore.
Mhm.
So, it's a different relationship. So
Yeah.
that, but it doesn't mean, there, we don't want to eat all the brownies, and it doesn't
Mhm.
mean we don't know that the brownies taste good. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that the whole thing, it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that we don't want to kind of give into, all of the indulgences,
Mhm.
but there's a way in which those indulgences don't have a hold over us anymore.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that's a really key shift to me, because
Yeah.
there's this way where I think we're, you know, we just, I mean, we're given such a purity standard, you know what I mean? Like, we're
Mhm.
given
Yeah.
such this, oh, that's there, I could do that, but I'm not going to do that. Like, that's
Well,
a
and that was
different.
the question came up around victorious, really in contrast to sort of how Joel Osteen uses victory as like the
Right.
prosperity gospel. And I think that's not where we're going. This isn't victory in terms of now everything's going to be great. You did your work. Now everything's going to flow to you. And it's, but yes, you did some work and you've taken the charge out of something. It still may show up,
True.
but
Yeah.
hopefully the charge has come out. It actually makes me think I've just been having this very weird thing for quite some time where often at stoplights I will think that someone is going to shoot me. This is crazy that I'm even mentioning this publicly, but I will have this like flash of like
Yeah.
I'm going to get shot in the head. It will just come in out and unbidden, but
Right.
like what's happened, like I don't react to it and I don't go, oh yes, I better drive quickly. I
Right.
better roll my, I don't have any emotional charge. It's just like, huh, that's a weird thought to come into my head again. Okay. All right. Maybe if it happens, it's over. So like there's no
Right.
reason to think about it. But
I've had that thought too.
yeah,
I think that's our world
I think
and
it is. Yeah.
all the gun
Yeah.
violence that we hear about that's so random.
Yeah.
But I have that too. When I'm stopped, I look around. I'm like, oh, that looks like a nice person. I
Yeah. Well, and there's a good example of,
I say a little prayer. May there not be a gunshot today.
yeah, yeah,
Innocent
yeah.
life.
Yeah, just how sensitive we are to the not just the spirits from the long ago, but the field we're in right now in the world that we live in. These are real concerns and real possibilities. And will it leave me in fear? And so I don't want to leave my house ever. And I think that's probably that can happen to
Right.
some people. Or is it something that I'm gonna feel and then choose to continue to live my life anyway, regardless? Yeah.
Right. But that's a
Um,
great example, I think, of just how the hells use,
mhm,
the zeitgeist, or use what's in, like,
mhm,
what information is coming into us to try
mhm.
and get holds over us in different ways. It's just a
Mhm.
great, I think we all, and that's it, it's um, you know, because it's one of those, and that, what he spends a lot of time in this chapter talking about is that idea that this is the idea of the earthly versus the inner,
Mhm.
and that that's very much that material, bodily safety concern, that's pretty core to all of us, that's as earthly as you can get right there, actually. And it's like, okay, how do I push, you know so there's some, little spirit kind of like pushing on the buttons, like, how do I get that one to go off? It's like,
Mhm.
like trying to get their
Yeah.
eyes on it all,
And the
because
thing that that he's helping us to acknowledge is just, and I think that's maybe why, I don't know, maybe why some people don't want to have these conversations is like, it's a lot to be a human being right now. I mean, and maybe
yeah,
it's a lot in
right,
every generation, but just like it's a lot. There are so many things to be afraid of. There are so many, you know, that are and if we think of evil spirits as like that, the external parts of ourselves, the parts of the world, the stories of the past, there are so many
yeah,
ways we can go wrong. And I think and for, in terms of my own process with this, my one of my major spiritual crises was like getting to a point of thinking like of just really like there's nothing I can do. Like I'm gonna harm people. Harm is coming into me. I'm gonna harm other people. It's, I don't know how to make myself good, like really being in just like this deep crisis around whether I was like able to kind of get out of this network of harm that feels so overwhelming. And that crisis really birthed me into, no, Sage, you're not. Like God can, no, you're not gonna
You're right.
you're not
You're
gonna float
absolutely
above
right.
this harm and all of a
No,
sudden become holy while everyone else is suffering.
right.
But that there is still, it's good to be alive, and that there's a goodness and a love that is gonna stay with me and stay with all of us through this sea of harm and struggle and dysfunction and every other thing we can add to the list. I mean, it definitely feels like the list of what evil can do is much longer sometimes than the goodness is doing. But I believe that the reason that it feels that way is just because evil likes to be really complicated and just like go off on
And loud.
tangents. And so it's a lot, but it's like it's not the force that's creating life. It's not
Right.
the force that's bringing us into being. It's not the force that's birthing babies and, feeding people. And, the real stuff of life in many ways has nothing to do with it. Doesn't even have a role. It's just, it's extraneous. And I think that this model of the inner and the outer is really powerful because like, yes, that's really loud, but it's extraneous. And we're going through these crises so we can clear it out, so we can see through it and connect more deeply to this bigger reality
Yeah.
that is so much more is substantial while this is insubstantial. And yet it can be hidden if we're sort of content with the external reality. It can be hidden. It doesn't have as much power. And so it becomes more powerful as we go through these crises.
And to link that off of one of his biggest points that he tries to make in this section, which is this is not us fighting it. This is the Lord fighting it for us.
Yeah.
And us consistently having, coming back to that reality where, yeah, there isn't any goodness in me. There really isn't, and yet there's all this goodness that's bestowed upon me and for me and in spite of me and all those things, like that's the reality. That's what's really real. And it's us, and I mean, that process you describe is just, I mean, it's the process of every great, every great, spiritual teacher has been through that. Every great spiritual, from, from Augustine to Luther to Swedenborg, like they all have that moment where they're like, I am just a wretch.
Yeah.
And then what? Like, oh, and then there's all this grace that's actually going to be presented to me and for me, there's this real, that, and I think that's because to me, that's that's a hopeful piece I have to always keep holding on to is it's like, it's a phrase, I've actually kind of come up with a phrase that's out of this process, which is like that I keep trying to remind people of and myself. It's like, look, this is not your process. You think this is your process. You think that you are going to open yourself up or you're going to go do therapy or you're going to, work these things out with your spouse or whatever they are. This is that this is the Lord's process with you.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord's process with you is going to be probably a lot more gentle than you suspect it might be. It's probably going to be a lot more compassionate than you think it might be. It's actually going to be way more subtle.
Maybe.
Yeah. And then some days it's going to be
sometimes
like,
it's worse
fly baby
think.
bird, poof. Like, some days it's going to be, a real shove, but more often it's certainly going to be a lot more unconscious than you think it is. That's the thing that I mean, in terms of like our awareness around the process of what's actually going on with us, like when we're stuck in our mud, we're stuck in our mud, like.
So do you think we can affect the process of a spiritual crisis?
We're collaborative with it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he says that here again and again. It's like, it is imperative that we act like it is our own, that we pull on the rope as hard as we pull on the rope. But the point is not our pulling on the rope. The point is the development that happens with us, that the permission it gives God to be able to do things with us and what is developed in us by pulling on the rope, not the fact that we're actually going to pull the pulling on the rope is going to affect the outcome as much as it is going to transform us into somebody that can receive the gifts of what's opening in us. It's a, I think that's the, it's a different, so, but our efforting is still critical,
Yeah. I struggle with that as a one in the Enneagram and a doer. I want to control the process, and I want to do it. I want to put all my effort into it and make sure it goes as well as possible. And that's often the problem, is me trying to manage it a little too aggressively, or to judge others for not going through it as aggressively, or, I think that's, yeah, it's a paradox, the process of participation and surrender. It's God is growing us. That's often the way I've been thinking about lately. We're being grown by God, and part of that growth happens through our seeming participation.
That actually leads me to one of my notes, because you brought up Enneagram, and as one of this like perfect, but now I've kerfuffled myself here in good fine fashion, but just this, the notion, so in 96 or 97 2, in Spiritual Crisis, what is under assault is the thing we love the most. And one of the beautiful ideas of, one of the things I think that makes Enneagram more and more a great tool is that it's a map for the thing that we love most. I'm a 9, you're a 1. You want to be right, and you want to be in control. Like, that's what you want. And like, I'm a 9, I want to be comfortable. I want a Barker lounger, and that's what I want. Like, I want, and I want things to be peaceful. That's, which is really what that means. It doesn't mean, it's not quite that, but and so, what gets assaulted with me when I'm in Spiritual Crisis is my apple cart gets turned over, and I am my comfort of my understanding, my comfort has now gone away, and I'm like, this, my peace has been damaged, my calm is damaged, and that, and for you, I imagine it looks a little different, in that, but where you're a little more out of control, and you're like, wait a minute, my control is gone. Like, I had the levers here, and my steering wheel isn't doing anything. And I think it's just so critical if we can map that out for our own development. Like, what is that thing that we really love most, that no matter where we go, that's the thing we're going to seek out, because that's where we're going to end up getting attacked, because it is also our most basic sin. It's where we overplay our hand every time. If you're a bridge player, like, we bid too much on that, and we always bid that suit too high, like, it's just, so anyway, so that just was a lightning bolt for me around Enneagram stuff, and you mentioned it. So
and when we're attacked around the things we love,
exactly, that's where the attack's going to come, is that we're going to, I'm going to be on my peace is going to be damaged, and I, I can put up with anything in the world as long as I can, like, I can have a sense of peace, and I know, but when that's gone, like, that's, and I think, I would imagine for you, like, as long as you have a sense of agency, there's something for me to do, and I know the right thing to do, and I can do the right thing, you can do anything. And I really believe that, like, you can do anything, and Connie, I don't
when
know
I don't know what to do, then I
exactly.
am lost.
Yeah,
Yes.
Right.
So I do things like this, like New Jerusalem discussion groups. We have about 12 more minutes. There's a topic I want to broach, but I don't know, we don't have a ton more time. But I think, in thinking about the world today and the suffering kind of that we are aware of, and especially the amount of kind of substance abuse that exists in our world, and painkillers and drugs and alcohol, and even thinking about my own story of being on antidepressants for a long time, I've wondered about our that if this is the process of life, is crises, spiritual crises, that kind of entering them, suffering through them, and getting through them is how we grow. I wonder sometimes if our reliance on all of these addictions is we don't want to. I don't want to be in crisis. I don't want to go through this process. I don't want to feel the depths of depression. I don't want to feel isolated, you know, just that there's so much that we're actually like, there are spiritual crises happening all over the place. Like people are really being called to change and to suffer that change. And I don't want to bring this up as like a blanket statement that we shouldn't use antidepressants or that we shouldn't do drugs or any of that stuff. Like I think in some ways, maybe they're keeping us alive. Maybe this stuff is like keeping us alive, even if we're alive in a limited way. But it just sort of, to me, it points out the deep need in our world right now for help to navigate crises, to navigate this kind of inner suffering, inner challenge. And I think of like when you go to surgery, when you have surgery, you need morphine and to be put out so that you can have the surgery, you know, like that there's a role at times for medications or drugs or things that can, maybe the crisis is just too much, it's too hard, and people need to take the edge off. But I lift that up, and I just sort of, I think it's something I know I want to hold, and it's something I've personally held as I've made choices about, you know, I think it's like we choose to suffer, we choose to escape, you know, we always sort of have that choice in us. And I don't think we have to always go head on into every single suffering. Like maybe a little escape is okay from time to time, and we need but we can see where that's gone kind of awry or gone to extreme levels, to the point where we don't get that joy at the end. You know, there's that great paragraph in here of once it's over, you feel joy. Once you get to the other side, there's relief. And I just feel like there's a lot of humans on the planet wanting relief. So anyway, I don't know if either of you want to get into that. And Renee actually brought into the discussion, what are your senses of the role of suffering, which in some ways is tied to this sort of necessary suffering or avoidance of suffering.
Right. Well, again, I'll go back to, I think, you know, that's part of each one of us has got you know, we've got a different relationship to that.
Yeah.
You know, because of, you know, the thing we love most is different for each one of us, you know, and so we're going to have a different relationship to that. And so, you know, my relationship to suffering isn't necessarily what somebody else's should be. You know what I mean? Like, so I think there's a real individuation in that, but also, you know, for me, like I have very much adopted this, you know, like my mantra lately has been comfort is the enemy. Like I really have, because, that's, again, I'm not putting that on the world. I'm not saying that's what the way the world should be. I'm saying that's for me, because I really have come to this notion that the comfort, you know, that all the good things in life are actually on the other side of struggle. And there's a very different, and this is the difference, I think, between suffering and struggle. Suffering is a kind of suffering always to me has a sense of trappedness to it, that like I am suffering and I will never get out of this thing. And yet, you know, what this chapter suggests is that every storm blows itself out eventually, that there is actually joy in the morning, that the joy comes in the morning. We don't know when, but the joy does come in the morning. And that for some of it may be, you know, for people who suffer from chronic pain, that might be, you know, when they shed the mortal coil, I don't know, but there is this sense where, but that doesn't mean there isn't still struggle. Like there's always, you know, and that everything good is actually on the other side of struggle. Like everything, you know, this was part of what I got out of Camino, actually, was a piece of like getting up every day and walking, and just walking, and knowing my feet are going to hurt, knowing my knees already hurt, you know, and that, but just getting up and walking, and that all of the gifts that come to you, and that the you know, not just the accomplishment of the day, it's not just the accomplishment, but every encounter with a pilgrim along the way, every beautiful vista, every moment, like, but it only comes through like it, that struggle is a piece of it, and that we have to, so that, and and I think the other part of that is that, and maybe this goes to your point about like what we've forgotten is that we're actually hardwired for it. we're built for it. We're built to struggle. We're built to carry heavy loads. We're built to do hard things. We're built for it. And so that, when we get that, like, the medicalization of suffering or of struggle, like, I think I think there's a real conversation. I think that may be what you're pointing at. And I think that's the real, like, no, and people, like, we have a right to our struggle. You know what I mean? Like, we have a right to struggle. We have a right to not have it all worked out, and yet not have, I remember a friend of mine, he did, I think, 3 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He's a army chaplain. I mean, he'd seen a lot of badness, a lot of human pain in this world. And more than most anybody I know, in terms of just the deployments he ended up on and this sort of stuff. Like, he was in some gnarly places for a long time. And, he was telling, he's senior chaplain, getting ready to get out. And he was standing there with a doc, because they're kind of grouped together in the headquarters. He's kind of telling his story. He was telling about, this one time when they had to go out and actually kind of help kind of gather human remains. And it was just kind of what was going on. And he says, I think about that every once in a while. And the doc turned to him, he says, you want something for that? Like, he says, no. And the guy's pretty wise. And he says, no, I just wanted to tell you my story. It was really not we really do have a right to our struggle, and like that, and we still have a right to kind of hold on to that, and that there's a lot of off ramps to our struggle these days. And I think that maybe that's what you're pointing at. There's a lot of easy opt-outs, whether it's Netflix and brownies, or whether it's a pill, or whether it's an illicit substance. Like, there's a lot of, there's probably more off ramps than we've ever been offered before, I think, in creation. And that makes it a perilous time spiritually, because really, there's something beautiful in our struggle. Actually, it's maybe where all beauty is. Like, if you really want to start to get into it, like, anyway,
that's part of this moment, being alive at this point in time.
Yeah, this time
we're alive after all of our, so many ancestors have, like, how can we make this more comfortable? Let's just keep making it more comfortable. Let's make drugs. Let's make fancy homes. Let's make machines. And then, like, yesterday, when I had no power, we don't know how to function when we don't have all of our comfort. So, like, that's sort of the kind of, and I think it makes the moment more insane. I was at a water park.
I mean, there is biblically, technike is the gift of Cain. That's the gift of Cain that is found not appropriate, that he ends up killing Abel over, is technike, is technology. Like, is so, and it's actually grounded in pharmakia, which is pharmacy, like, which is the idea of, I mean, it is, these are very ancient things that we're hashing out, as you're right, as we live in this world where we've never had to contend with, but
we stand on the precipice of having to contend with it. That's what's so terrifying, is none of us know how to garden. We don't know how to do anything for ourselves. And if the power were to, we would have to somehow figure it out. And that's sort of one of the tensions of this moment, in terms of how do we, and probably we will be able to be given opportunities to learn to struggle. But yeah, we have so many choices of ways to avoid it. One of the other gifts of the Garden Church, to close this around with Connie, is you don't have a building that's going to collapse. You're right there in nature. There's maybe a groundedness that comes from that, from your community. Do you want to say a word about suffering before we close?
Yes, I do. I want to say, here I go again. I really haven't experienced suffering in my life in a deep, serious way. Yes, I've grieved, the death of loved ones, but as far as real suffering, I've had an easy life. So I've tried to be ready for when that suffering might come. And I've also tried to take on the suffering of others in my choices, workplace choices, homeless services, and at the garden, to be a little bit of a comfort to others. But I really like this idea of comfort is the enemy, but that we're built for struggle. Because that's what I keep telling myself, is that I'm ready for that suffering if it were to come, because apparently I haven't been challenged enough and I haven't been regenerating enough. So I'm ready.
I don't know though, Connie.
think there's a
I do
correlation
wonder
there,
if your
yeah.
journey has just been a little bit a different pace or something different because of all you do. I mean, you put yourself right in the trenches of people and their human suffering. So you must, people who are really immune to that or not, they would not be stepping into that world. So
Like in simple little things, like I take home the dishes from the garden to wash after the Sunday
yes,
meal. It's a
yes,
disgusting, very humble
yes,
job because I'm scraping off the food and putting it in
yeah,
compost.
yeah,
And why do you do that? I said, because I'm ready for something that's hard
yeah, yeah,
and gross and dirty.
yeah. Yeah.
And
And maybe it's just your willingness. I mean, I don't know. I like to
Exactly.
believe maybe my struggles are going to get a little less traumatic if I can be slightly more willing
Right.
to step into it, and it's part of the suffer. And this is the thing. God is not doing this. God is not trying to create temptation for us. God would like it to probably be smooth and connected and loving. It's the stuff we're attached to that is kind of riling up and making it more of a drama. So yeah. Wow. Well, it's 1 o'clock. This has been a really great conversation. Some good comments online. We're done for the year. I hope you both have a Merry Christmas next weekend, and I hope everyone has a Happy New Year. And we'll be back together on January 9th, I believe, for our next chapter in the book. So thank you, Andy, and thank you, Connie, so much for
Merry
being here
Christmas to
today.
you both, and thank you, Sage, for facilitating all this. Like, it's
You're
a real
so
joy.
welcome.
Like, it's a great gift to the world. It really
Well,
is.
thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me. All right. Bye, Connie.
Bye, Connie.